You have gotta be kidding me.
So back in October, I made a video on Star Road, a ROM hack of Super Mario 64 that took the game and made a completely new hub world and set of levels to play through. It's basically the closest thing we'll ever get to a Mario 64 2. I'm not super proud of that video. I don't think I did a very good job explaining my thoughts on it and stretched the video out for time, in a video that's already pretty short, but I really enjoyed my time with Star Road, and I was open to making more videos focusing on games like it. Fast forward to February of this year, and I was ready to make another video on a Mario 64 ROM hack, when I got an idea. Instead of covering one fan game, what if I covered a bunch of them in one video? And that's how I came up with the idea for the Fan Game Variety Hour. Because I love to cheat death. Today we're going to be taking a look at some recent ROM hacks and fan games I played. Some of these I bet you've heard of before, but I tried to make sure that most of the games on this list were ones that don't get a whole lot of attention online. And I know this channel is super small, but I hope that this video is able to bring some new eyes to them. First up on our list we have a spooky ROM hack of Mario 64. B3313 is the first game we're going to be taking a look at today. It's the ROM hack that inspired me to make this video actually. In case you couldn't tell by just looking at it, the game's based around the whole every copy of Mario 64 is personalized thing that was popular a few years back. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, it was basically this creepypasta about how beta builds of Mario 64 had an AI in them that would alter the game to be different for each player. Dare I say, personalizing them. So yeah, this ROM hack takes that idea and makes a whole new game out of it. There might not be an actual AI messing with the game, but on your first playthrough it definitely feels like it because there is so much to explore. Mario 64 was already a pretty big game with plenty of areas to explore, at least at the time it was released. There are far bigger games nowadays. But B3313 takes the castle and all of the game's stages and makes multiple versions of them to represent those areas at different points in development, as well as a bunch of additional levels and areas of the hub world that are supposed to be cut content. Some of these areas even have special text boxes that indicate they were meant to be shown at conventions such as Nintendo Space World, which is a neat attention to detail. The character models, textures, and HUD are all based on their prototype counterparts. Mario's famous wahoos are instead a bunch of public domain voice clips like in plenty of prototypes, and you can even play as Luigi. He's just a model swap of Mario, there's no gameplay differences between the two. Hell, he didn't even have his own unique voice lines. But I think it makes sense because it wasn't really until the 2000s when Luigi became his own unique character, and not just Mario, but green. However, despite taking inspiration from a trend that's supposed to be scary, B3313 doesn't really try to be. There are still plenty of jump scares and spooky events that you can come across if you dig deep enough, but for the most part, the horror from this game comes from how it messes with your sense of familiarity. Everything's off, even in the stages that are pretty close to the final games. There are plenty of areas that are unnerving, and some stages even terraform if you go down a certain path, all leading to an experience where you're always on edge, expecting some massive scare that, unless you look really hard, never comes. It's a really good approach to making Mario 64 a horror game that isn't just adding a bunch of gore and violence for shock value. I personally didn't finish the game for this video. The castle is absolutely massive in this hack, which, while cool and definitely adding to the horror aspect of the game, makes it a bit confusing and annoying to complete as a normal Mario 64 experience. This hack is definitely meant to be something that you slowly chip away at over time, and not something to dedicate your full attention to completing. Don't let that deter you from this hack though. B3313 is a really good game and definitely worth your time. Well, that's one game down. The next is another ROM hack of Super Mario 64. Wait. This one has Cheese the Chao in it. Chao Bandstand. My favorite Sonic game that isn't actually a Sonic game. This hack revolves around Sonic characters Cream the Rabbit and her mother Vanilla, who run the local Chao Garden and are currently getting the Chao ready to perform for a concert. But uh-oh, somebody steals all of their instruments, and with her mom forced to deal with all the upset Chao, it's up to Cream to find the instruments and get them back. Chao Bandstand is pretty small in scope, having only one level based on Music Plant from Sonic Advance 2. The core gameplay is the same as Mario 64's, you enter a level and complete a set list of objectives. although instead of stars, the player collects music boxes. Cream plays almost the exact same as Mario. The only difference between the two is that she has the ability to fly for a couple of seconds by pressing A in midair. It's not super important to the gameplay. I mainly used it to correct any jumps I messed up, but there were a few times where it was required, such as jumping across these walls that are pretty far away from each other. A positive I'll give to Chao Bandstand right away is that despite being a ROM hack, pretty much all of its assets are either completely original or heavily modified. Not only to match with the fact that it's a Sonic game now, but also because of the music-themed locales you come across. Using the game's enemies as an example, Goombas are now Motobugs, spiders are crab meats, boos are now Boos, real original Sonic team. Piranha plants are now Bluminators from Sonic 3, bullies are now the Claw Badniks seen in a lot of casino stages, and the Chain Chomps are based on Zavok's Moon Mech from Lost World, all of which have had little music-themed cosmetics added to them, such as instruments or band hats. The boos are the only exception. Instead of looking like members of the school band, they look like they're about to break it down on the dance floor. The only thing I noticed that was taken from Mario 64 with no changes whatsoever is the piano from Big Boo's Haunt, which I thought was more clever than lazy since this is a music-themed level we're running across. One of Music's Plant's objectives is to help him find his grandson after he gets lost. It's basically the baby penguin mission from Mario 64, but instead of a penguin, it's one of these things. Other objectives include navigating an obstacle course, playing a game of musical chairs, going down a slide, racing the Tails doll, and the optional objective of collecting 100 rings, which I did because, there's not a lot of content already, might as well go for 100%. All of these were pretty fun. The only one I had a rough time with was the slide mission, not because the slide itself was poorly designed, it just relies heavily on wall jumping, which if you've ever played Mario 64, you'll know that the wall jump is a bit jank. The stage is capped off with the race against the Tails doll that I mentioned earlier. He claims to have been the one who stole all of the Chao's instruments, which after beating him in the race, is something he admits was a complete fib, directing us towards the real thief, the real Tails. When we meet him, he tells us that he was tired of the Chao always entering his lab and destroying his stuff, stealing their instruments as a form of revenge. He gives Cream one last warning to back off, warning that he'll fight her using an old Eggman mech he found at a scrapyard, and totally not Bowser. Guess what happens? With his mech gone, Tails apologizes for his actions and makes amends with Cream and her family. Not before Vanilla beats the shit out of him though. And with that, the Chao are able to perform their concert, ending Chao Bandstand. In case you couldn't tell, I really like this game. It's actually my favorite out of all the ones I played for this video. It's not very long, you can finish it in less than an hour, but what's here is some quality content, and something you could tell Game Bun and the rest of the dev team were super passionate about, not just by the amount of fun Easter eggs that can be found, but also the fact that they just dropped their own OCs in there. Overall, Chao Bandstand is a strong recommend from me. It's fun and wholesome as heck. Well, with 2 games out of the way, it's finally time for a call from one of our viewers. This one's coming all the way from Virginia. You're on the air.
Okay, so Chao Bandstand is cool and all, but what about a hack that plays like a Sonic game?
That's actually what we were going to be taking a look at next. Thank you for the call,
Christine?
Thank you, Christy. Sonic RDX is a hack of Sonic Adventure released all the way back in 2010. Despite its age though, the page for it on Sonic Retro says that it is still one of, if not, the most impressive modding effort ever done to the game, which, considering how big the modding scene for both adventure games is saying something. The main goal of RDX, at least back when it was still in development, was to create brand new stages to play through that still retain the themes of the levels they were based on. For example, the first stage is clearly based off of Emerald Coast, but it takes place at sunset and has new mechanics such as ships for Sonic to run across. RDX has a new UI, character models, and even a brand new intro with a pretty neato remix of Open Your Heart. Sonic stages in SA1 were always my favorite part of that game, and I bet it is for most people too, even if they do like the alternate gameplay styles of the adventure games. So having a set of new levels in the SA1 engine is a treat. They're good stages and have a lot of fun platforming and exploration. In some areas, I'd say that the level design is more open-ended than the original Sonic Adventure. However, as much as I like Sonic RDX, I would never recommend it in this day and age. Not only because it's based on the 2004 PC version of Sonic Adventure DX, which as we all know is a perfectly polished and well-made port of the game, but also because it's a 2010 hack of a 2004 PC game running on a PC built in 2024. You do the math. Not only are there no options to play in full screen or increase the game's resolution, meaning that if you ever want to play RDX it's going to be stuck in window mode and very pixelated, but it's also barely compatible with any modern controllers. When I booted it up for the first time, I had to end up remapping all of the buttons, because the buttons they were on made no sense. Like instead of the start button, I had to click the right analog stick to start the game. Like, what? Even after I remapped all of the buttons, some of them still didn't work. Like the triggers. Which is a bit of a problem since that's how you rotate the camera in Sonic Adventure. Speaking of the camera, due to the controller issues I mentioned earlier, I cannot stand still at all while playing this game. Or else it does this. These aren't negatives against RDX itself. It probably worked perfectly fine when it came out, but it's pretty hard to enjoy it nowadays when it feels like the game's fighting against you at every opportunity. Like I mentioned earlier, both of the Sonic Adventure games have a pretty big modding community. It's thanks to them that SADX is a good game. So I'm hoping that someday someone decides to port RDX to the modern, more stable version of SADX we have now in order for it to be played as originally intended. Because for such a big hack back in its day, it deserves better preservation. Okay, I've been talking about Sonic a little too long, so the next series we're going to cover is one well known for its fan content. Five Nights at FNaF is a franchise I have a very weird relationship with. I've never played any of the games, watched the movie, read the books, and I have no plans to. But I know way too much about this franchise to be considered one of them. But that all changes today. I'm finally trying my first FNaF game. I mean, this technically counts. Five Nights in BFBB is the mod of cult classic SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, taking that game's engine and making a FNaF game inside of it. I guess Mr. Krabs has reduced SpongeBob's already small paycheck because he's gotten a second job as a security guard at an old industrial park storage facility. The gameplay is what you'd expect. There's a group of robots you have to look out for by using the facility's security cameras, lock your doors if they get too close to you, and manage your power so that you don't run out and get a spooky jump scare. There's even a phone guy who gives you advice like the first three games. Once again, never played a FNaF game. The only difference between the gameplay of FNaF and this mod, once again, never played a FNaF game, so you'd have to correct me on anything I get wrong, is that you actually walk around the office you're in and have to use SpongeBob's abilities from Battle for Bikini Bottom in order to push the buttons that activate the doors. Even though it's not 100% accurate to the source material, it was finally nice to get a taste of that FNaF gameplay. I liked it. It's simple and easy to understand, but still challenging and hard to master. Kinda like an old arcade game, but with jump scares. I can definitely see why a game like this would have gone viral back in the early 2010s outside of the lore. That's all I really have to say about Five Nights in BFBB. It's good, but I was mainly using it as a way to warm up for the next game I'm going to be taking a look at, BFBB Mix. BFBB Mix is a mod in the vein of something like Star Road, taking a pre-existing game and creating a whole new campaign for it. Roboplankton's back and up to no good, meaning it's time for SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy to team up once again and put a stop to his plans. The basic gameplay loop of the original is pretty much the exact same. The only difference is that instead of collecting shiny objects to get golden spatulas from Mr. Krabs, you use them to unlock different levels Mr. Krabs owns, which are linear and have only one golden spatula to collect, compared to the game's normal levels, which are more open and have multiple spatulas to collect. It's basically the original system, but with extra steps. The hub world, instead of being the street SpongeBob lives on, is instead the air vents of his house. A bit of a downgrade from the original, but hey, The main focus of the game is the levels outside of SpongeBob's vents, which are also a bit of a downgrade from the original. Not gameplay-wise, the stages have a bunch of fun objectives to complete, but definitely in the visual department. Most of the objects you'll see while playing look fine, they're mostly unchanged from the original, but the actual terrain you're walking on looks like a fan game I'd find on Roblox. The soundtrack is also something I'm pretty split on. I think some of the remixes here are nice alternatives to their original versions, even if I still prefer them at the end of the day, but certain songs sound way too much like they tried to modernize them. Take a listen. But outside of those pretty small negatives, there isn't a whole lot to complain about with BFBB Mix. It's just more of what that game had to offer. A more fitting title for this mod would have been Battle for Bikini Bottom again. Not every spatula to collect is a winner, but neither was every spatula in the original, so evens out. There were some standout qualities though, at least for me. The bosses that you go up against, despite being the same roster as the original, have brand new attack patterns. The dialogue, despite not having any voice acting to back it up, is pretty solid with some pretty funny jokes. One of my favorite moments in the game comes from Sand Mountain. SpongeBob gets challenged to a time trial down one of the slides by the Ice Puff, a giant and immortal god covered in ice that just looks like Mrs. Puff for no reason. Overall, a pretty solid campaign, even if it doesn't have the greatest music or visuals. I recommend it to any fans of the original game who are looking to have a new experience with it.
And that concludes our first edition of the Fan Game Variety Hour. Let me know if you liked this episode. I'd really like for this to become a recurring series on the channel. And let me know about your favorite ROM hacks and fan games in the comments. I need ideas.